A friend of mine recently posted these two questions. One is a direct question and one is a hypothetical, and I'm going to do my best to try to respond. And the question is essentially why I personally could not join a Roman Catholic church. Now, this is from a friend of mine who is Roman Catholic. I have no animosity and no enmity with my Roman Catholic friends. However, there are some dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church that I cannot accept, and I want to discuss that civilly and as politely as possible. So let's take a look.
All right, question for my Protestant brothers and sisters. If you're Catholic, keep scrolling. This isn't really going to apply to you. But if you're Protestant, I have two questions for you, and I'm genuinely asking here. I'm not being facetious or anything. I genuinely want to know. Could you ever join or even attend a church which preaches the four Marian dogmas from the pulpit? We're talking Mary is the Mother of God, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, the Perpetual Virginity of Mary, and the bodily Assumption of Mary into heaven. Could you ever even attend a church which preaches these from the pulpit? If that answer is no, I have a second question. Let's say you were to jump into a time machine and head back to, say, the 4th, 5th century. Where would you go to church? These are universally taught by the 4th and 5th century in every church. Where would you go to church? Genuinely asking, would you forsake gathering together? This is a question I heard from my brother William Albrecht in a recent debate. I think it's an excellent question, and I'm genuinely curious. What would you do? All right, love to hear your answer. God bless. Take it easy.
This is a really good hypothetical question posed by, well, the second one's hypothetical. The first one I can answer easily, and I'd like to try to respond to that as a Baptist. Would I or could I attend a church that preaches the four Marian dogmas? And the answer to that is I could not attend or join myself to a church that preaches the four Marian doctrines as dogma, as is formulated in the Roman Catholic Church as it exists today. Now, the second question he posed is, if you go back in time to the 4th or 5th century, what church would you attend? And my answer to that would be any church that was Christian, because the Christian church at that time, a true apostolic Christian church, in the 4th and 5th centuries, only had one of the Marian doctrines that were essentially dogmatized, and that is the doctrine of the Theotokos, that Mary is the Mother of God, which doesn't speak much to Mary's being, but it speaks to the deity of Jesus. That's why the doctrine was dogmatized, and it's heresy, essentially, to believe otherwise. You are anathematized if you deny the deity of Jesus, and I can accept that. I cannot accept the later doctrines that were conceptualized in the early centuries, but were not dogmatized till later, like the Perpetual Virginity, dogmatized in the 7th century, and then even much later time, you have the other Marian doctrines that were being fleshed out, conceptualized, theorized, and then eventually dogmatized, to where if you reject any one of those four, you are anathematized, you are cut off. That's why I could not join a church today that preaches them as dogma. Now, if the church taught that Mary was a perpetual virgin, I have no problem with that. I just have a problem if you are going to tell me that I'm anathematized from Christ if I do not believe Mary was a perpetual virgin. I just don't, I can't accept that. Now, I have no problem with the perpetual virginity of Mary. What are the other two? The Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Mary. Okay, both of those are not really, obviously neither of those concepts are in the scripture. Okay, you can eisegete the concept into the scripture, but you cannot out of the scripture exegete any one of those dogmas. Okay, in other words, you have to start with the conceptual theory, which is the thesis formed by the theory that Mary was probably, conceived immaculately without sin in order to be a holy vessel, to be the right vessel and holy vessel by which Jesus could be born. You're starting with the thesis that that's absolutely essential and necessary for the birth of Christ when the scriptures doesn't really indicate that. And then you eisegete that thesis into the scriptures, and you'll find passages like the announcement to Mary by the angel Gabriel, Hail Mary, highly favored of the Lord, full of grace, right? And you'll say, well, see, she's full of grace in a unique way because she was immaculately conceived. But that's not referencing anything about an immaculate conception. If she was in a perfect state, it doesn't say when that state took place. And so to say that you have to believe immaculate conception to be a Christian, or else you're anathematized from the church and therefore at risk of eternal damnation. Again, I can't join a church that teaches that as dogma. Could she have been immaculately conceived? Sure. I have no problem with you believing that. But it's not something that you can send somebody to hell over. And again, the assumption of Mary is an assumption. Maybe she was assumed into heaven. And there's different views that Catholics hold, whether it was body and soul assumed into heaven, whether she did actually die, but it was assumed directly to heaven and in the presence of God, not needing to go through any purgatory, or whatever else the Catholic Church teaches. Again, that's fine. Maybe it happened that way. It's just not essential. It's a fun theory to discuss, but you can't dogmatize it. And the reason it's been dogmatized is because the Roman Catholic Church has taken upon itself an authority that I do believe was never intended for it to claim. And I think there's plenty of evidence from the early church that points to the fact that when Rome began to position itself after the four popes of the main, the patriarchies of Antioch, you had Constantinople, you had Rome, and what was the other one? Was it Ephesus? I forget what the fourth one was. But when three of those popes fell, and they referred to each other as popes because they were in charge of the church planting efforts of their entire districts. When three of those fell, you had Rome remaining, and they just took that to mean that God was favoring them above all others, when there's no concept of a pope out of scriptures. There's bishops, and there is the idea that there is supposed to be a plurality of council in the leadership of not only local churches, but the church as a whole is to be what it is, a church, an assembly. But that being said, once Rome began taking upon itself a little more authority than what was given to it, and if you read church history, there were plenty of bishops who were bucking against that, saying, wait a second, Rome, you're taking upon yourself a little more authority than what should be there. And the further some of these, the more the church grew, the more nuanced it became with how you're going to maintain the unity of the church under the auspice of a singular institution. And I don't think Christ ever intended the church to be an institutionalized form of governments on the earth. It's his body that's to go to the nations to suffer that people might see the truth of Christ in the life of the believer as they are living for Christ, and that believer can endure persecution and suffering through the assembling of the church. That's why you're not to forsake the assembling of yourselves together, so much the more as you see the day approaching. But persecution and suffering will increase, and we need to be encouraging one another. That's the purpose of the gathering of the church. The purpose is not to be under some sort of institutionalized hierarchy of leadership, but that's what Rome kind of took upon itself, and they were able to solidify that power once we had Roman emperors turning over his crown to the Pope of the Church, and that really that synchronizing of political and religious power was what was the seed for what became the Roman Catholic Church specifically. Okay, and so that's fine if you want to be a part of that, but it is a development that came later, and I hope I'm covering a lot of ground here. So if somebody's going to want to do a comment on this, I know you're going to have to break down each little topic I'm covering here, because I'm covering a big topic where I'm simply trying to respond to why I could not join myself to a Roman Catholic Church today, and I hope I was clear on why. And I answered the second hypothetical, that 4th or 5th century, yes, I would attend the churches that existed then, because they didn't anathematize you if you didn't accept what was not dogmatized at that time.